Welcome to another segment of Sacramento Zoo Live, sponsored by Jiffy Lube of Greater Sacramento. Today, your host will be Kate with Ronnie, our ambassador alligator.
That's right. So this is Ronnie. He is the newest addition to the Interpretive Center's Animal Ambassadors. Now he is a young American alligator, and I say American alligator because there is a different species of alligator called the Chinese alligator as well. They're just typically a little bit smaller. Now Ronnie here actually hatched out around the end of August, so he's still pretty young. So this is a good time for him to get used to being handled, doing kind of programming type stuff, because that's what his kind of role would be as an animal ambassador. So if you guys are ready, we'll actually get a chance to see him in the water, unless you want any close look at his scales, and you can kind of look and see how strong and armored those are for protection. This animal is sometimes called a living fossil because they've been relatively unchanged for over 150 million years. Such a long time. And these guys really are perfectly designed predators. They have that excellent armor to protect them. They have very strong teeth and jaws. Now granted, they have strong teeth and jaws, however, it is not to open their mouths. It takes them a bit of time to open their mouths because they have less muscles to open their jaws and more to snap them shut. Very, very important for that predator to be able to quickly grab their prey. Now, alligators, they are ambush predators, but they tend to move kind of in bursts of energy. So instead of putting on like a long run to go get their prey, instead what they would do is wait, hunker down until they see their prime opportunity to go get their prey, and then quickly use a burst of speed, close those jaws, use all of that power to get their prey animal. Now, as a very young alligator like Ronnie here, he's looking more at maybe getting insects, maybe really small kind of different kinds of bugs, or even fish that he would then kind of graduate to, and then eventually as they get older they can get mammals, particularly smaller mammals when they're kind of growing up. And then they can get, birds as well that might land on the water, and they use, again, that jaw power to get them. Now you'll notice as he's moving around, he's using that tail as well as the webbing on his feet to move in that water. So you're kind of getting a good opportunity to see him. Granted, he's floating now, but earlier he was swimming and using that tail. It's shaped almost like an oar. So it gives him a lot of power as he's moving through the water. Now what you can probably get a really good eye on is actually that kind of extra eyelid that goes over his eyes to protect him from the water. So that way he can stay submerged for a great deal of time. I could even be around 7 minutes that he could stay under the water. And then when he feels that he either needs food or he's in a safe location, he'll kind of pop up, and the nostrils and his eyes are near the top of his head. So that way when he lifts up out of the water, he just has to kind of poke, not his whole body, but just really to get his eyes and his nostrils up out of there so he can breathe, and then again get that extra field of view that he wouldn't be getting in the water necessarily.
So Kate, we had a question of how old is Ronnie?
So let's see, end of August, he's maybe about 7 to 8 months old, if I did my math right. But he is fairly young. Now when they're young, they grow a lot faster than when they get about 6 feet in length. So when they're young, they grow about a foot a year. So really quick growers. So that way they can get kind of a lot more defenses, really. Once they're larger, once they're in that 6 foot range, they have a lot less predators to worry about. When he's small like this, there are a lot more potential predators that could get a hold of him. Things from snakes to other types of mammals, carnivorous mammals, that would be able to get a hold of him because he's so small. So they want to grow very quickly, and then once they reach about that 6 foot mark, then they slow down that growth rate. Males tend to be a little bit bigger once they're kind of more fully developed, and so they could even get to about 14 feet in length. Oh, there we go. We saw his head pop out. He's taking in all of his surroundings, and his nostrils are up so that way he can get more air in as well. Now, I do, in fact, actually have some crickets that I'm going to see if I can throw into the water that we will see if Ronnie is interested. Today is a normal feed day for him, and crickets are kind of extra special. So we'll see if my excellent insect handling will allow him to enjoy some crickets today. There it goes. Nope, one. There we go. we'll just throw in a couple. And hopefully we'll be able to see him use, again, all of those excellent predator features and adaptations to get a hold of his cricket. However, they don't necessarily need food like we do. They don't need it as often. We have big brains and we are endothermic. We produce our own heat as mammals, so we require a lot more food. Ronnie here is a reptile, is an alligator, and so he is exothermic. We often say that as cold-blooded. And so he needs the outside temperature to kind of warm his own body. So for him, he's very dependent on what the temperature is outside. So oftentimes alligators are seen during the day basking in the sun, getting that energy from the sunlight, and then after they've kind of basked for long enough, they get warm and ready to go, then they'll move and they'll use again that quick burst of energy to go get food should they need it.
I know alligators have an interesting history, definitely with humans, that today they actually are doing pretty well. But weren't they an endangered species at one point?
Absolutely. In fact, they were one of the first inaugural classes of the endangered species list. So in around 1967, there was a kind of primary listing of the endangered species list. It included animals like the grizzly bear, the bald eagle, and the American alligator. Now, the great thing about the American alligator is it's also one of the first success stories. So in 1987, they improved enough in their population that they were taken off of the endangered species list. So very, very important. However, in certain areas, there is also the American crocodile, and so they are listed as threatened only because of their similarity in appearance to the vulnerable crocodile. Otherwise, these guys are considered stable, very, very stable populations because of human efforts to correct things like poaching and habitat loss. And that's one of their biggest concerns, is that habitat loss.
Now we have a question about our new alligator exhibit. Do we have more than one alligator on exhibit?
So we do have a few large males on exhibit. Obviously Ronnie would not be joining that group. And so these guys are about 6 foot in length that we have out on exhibit, and they can be in social groups when they are a little bit smaller. When you get really large dominant males, they tend to kind of want to have their own territory. But when they're younger or smaller, they stick close together. That can be a nice kind of protection, right? Protection in numbers for that. And so when they're young, like Ronnie here, they actually form pods. And so they stay very close together and they're camouflaged. So if you notice on Ronnie, he has all of those like yellow stripes. Those actually help him blend in with his siblings, and and it kind of helps predators have a harder time distinguishing individual gators from each other. And so when they're young like that, that can help. By sticking close together, you actually have better camouflage. When they get older, though, those yellow stripes go away, they start to maybe get their own space, and so then there's just less of them around each other. That way they can get their own food, and they have their own kind of territory that they can keep and maintain.
So you were talking earlier that there is an area where the American alligators live. There's also American crocodiles.
Yes.
How would you tell the difference between a crocodile and an alligator?
That's a really good question. So actually, one of the major things, one of the most definitive ways, is actually looking at their fourth tooth on their lower jaw, which seems very, like you have to get very close. But for alligators, it's all about kind of that overbite structure. So you guys can hopefully see on Ronnie that none of really those lower teeth are poking up. You don't really see them. They all fit nicely underneath his jaw. So they kind of fit into his mouth, and you see the teeth from the top of his jaw. And that is very quintessential alligator. Crocodiles have that fourth tooth on their lower jaw that sticks up past that point where their jaws meet. And so it's very, very definitive that way. The other thing is general kind of shape. So you could look, and Ronnie here has a nice little, it's called a U shape of his jaw, and alligators tend to have it a lot tighter, a lot more narrow. So it's kind of typically called a V shape. But sometimes that's hard to tell, especially as they're growing in those things. So that tooth is a very definitive way for us to be able to be like, ah, yes, that's an alligator, because he has that nice overbite. Oh, there we can see him moving, and you can see kind of those eyes will move as well. Like they'll move not just him looking around, but also kind of up and down. So that way they were kind of protected, so that scale can kind of protect that eye versus the eyelid, which allows him to see in the water. It's a different kind of protection that way.
Now, someone had asked if they could see the big gators, but The big gators are actually in a different section of the zoo. We are currently in our amphitheater area, so we won't be able to see the big gators during this live segment, but maybe in a future one. But being is part of our ambassador program that we're going to use for our shows that we have when the zoo is open, and then also he'll be part of our program that is doing education programs and then going out with us to visit the visitors when we open up again.
That's right, Ronnie here this is all practice, good training for him, and so that way he can get used to kind of being on stage, people looking at him, so us kind of looking in on his excellent swimming. That's also excellent practice, so that way he can get used to people, understand kind of how he just needs to be nice and calm and relaxed, and how that actually helps him for when these for these stage kind of programs or performances. And then for him, he will also be able to go out on those Zoomobiles, so it's very, very important. And he, as a smaller gator, a little bit more well suited than maybe those larger 6-foot ones that he can't quite go in the pool with yet.
So there's a question of how many teeth does an alligator have in their lifetime?
In their lifetime is very important. So right now, in their mouths, they might have between 70 or 80 teeth, but they go through them because they don't have the same root structure that we do. So instead of just having a set of adult and like juvenile teeth, they can go through about 3,000 teeth in their lifetime. They are constantly kind of replacing those teeth, whether that comes out as they're biting down on prey or it's just kind of through wear and tear. So they're able to replace those teeth a lot more than we do. We just have 2 sets. They have a lot more sets.
Well, Charlotte, age 6, has a question. How long until he reaches his full size?
So we consider for kind of that adult marker again to be about that 6 foot. So he needs to be 6 foot in length for him to kind of slow down his growing. So it might take him about 7 to 8 years-ish for him to get fully, like we call it, sexually mature in that adult phase of his life. And so he will grow about a foot a year until then. So until maybe he's about 7 or 8 and he's close to that 6 foot mark, he's gonna grow about a foot a year, roughly, right? And that depends how much is he eating, all of those kinds of things. So in the wild, that's why it varies so much. That's why it's not 6 always when they get 6 foot. Maybe because there's less food out available for them and they need to hunt for more food, or maybe it was a really dry year and so they aren't able to go out and get the food the same. So all of that kind of plays a factor into how those wild animals grow as well.
Does he make any noise?
Ooh, yes he does. So as a small gator, he has kind of this little, I don't know how to describe it as a chirp, a little kind of sound. He doesn't open his mouth and make a chirp like a chicken, but he makes this little sound, and it's kind of like that bonding call to mom.
Can you give us an example?
Probably not well. Like he does a little, Sure, that is a rough gator noise. And so he's able to do that sound, and usually if there's that mama gator nearby, he kind of is that call for alarm. It could be also just that bond, I'm nearby, I'm over here. It's like in a little alert that, hey, I'm over here, very important to keep me safe. But the bigger gators have much more larger, deeper sounds. In fact, even the males can make sounds that we can't hear, but we can see the vibrations of it on the water. It's a much deeper, typically called a bellow, and I definitely cannot imitate that one. But they do have a different range of sounds as well. And so typically the males might make it more during breeding season. They might be trying to announce territory or find a mate. But for the babies, they're making sure that they're in a nice location.
How long do they live?
So gators actually have very interesting, so they can live a really long time, I would consider. So in the wild even, they can live maybe even 50 years. In human care, they can live more than that, closer to maybe even the 60, 70 range. So they're quite a long-lived species. Very, very durable, that armor, those scales on the back for protection, excellent predators, and they don't necessarily need a ton of food all the time, so they're able to kind of maybe go without food for a day or two or longer, and so they can sit and wait, and that kind of affords them maybe a longer lifestyle in that aspect.
So what does he eat currently at the zoo?
What does he eat currently? Well, we have some crickets in with him that he has chosen not to eat yet, but he could. So insects, as a young alligator, he might get those insects, but also he gets what we call gator chow. It's a compressed pellet that has all the right nutrients he needs growth and for him to have that would kind of emulate what he would be getting out in the wild. So he gets those compressed pellets as well, and then he gets live insects in this case, which he has chosen to dutifully ignore.
And then when he gets bigger, what will be his food item?
So he can get much larger things. At the zoo, I think it is typically chicken.
Yeah. When he gets a little larger, he'll get some mice.
Mice, that's right.
And then our big guys get some
the
more
bigger
of the chicken.
ones get the chicken, exactly. Okay, good. That's what I was thinking.
So with this little guy, we see him in the water a lot. Do alligators spend all their time in the water?
Not necessarily. They do want to go up on kind of that like dry or even the muddy banks to bask in the sun. If he can get sunlight in the water, that's great, and he can do that too. It's nice because he has nice clear water here, but in the wild, you're thinking really like murky, muddy water. He may not be able to get all of that UV through that kind of muddy solution, right? And so he has to be able to get up on land to get that sun. This is just a temporary housing for him. This is just so you guys can have an easier time seeing him. In his home in the IC, he has a little ramp and a nice bank with a sun lamp so that way he can bask to his heart's content. And we often catch him out on his little bank basking away and getting that energy from that heat. Here in this case, the light's able to pass through the water and he can get some of that energy and that heat from directly from the sun. So it's also really good for him as well. And then he can hang out in the water too. So kind of added benefit there.
Now, I read somewhere that alligators can climb. Is that true?
Yeah, so they actually can climb and move around. They're quite mobile when they have the energy to. Granted, we often see them lying and basking, just like we were saying, but they can, when they get those energy, they can climb and move and kind of scale almost a little bit. Scale, because he has scales. Kind of different surfaces, right? It's really important for them to get across different terrain. And there's a lot of things that they would need to use their strength to get up and over. Even if it's just kind of climbing out of the water, that takes a lot of strength and effort. And so they can use that too on land and climb over things as well.
Now, when the zoo does open, where could people go to see Ronnie when they visit?
Ronnie here is likely to be seen. He will be part of that animal ambassador program, so you might see him out in the new wildlife lodge. You might see him with one of the education specialists out and about talking with him as well. But he doesn't have an exhibit out that you necessarily would go to and see. That's where you could see the larger alligators. But instead, he might go to schools or be here out on stage as well. So those are the types of places that Ronnie will be hanging out.
Now, if Ronnie's not out, people can always see our new exhibit, right? With the big gators?
That's right. So the exhibit is out and easy for viewing. So that's actually on the other kind of side of the lake of the flamingos, not in with the flamingos. And so it's over on that side, and we have the larger gators as well, almost kind of right when you walk in. So once the zoo's open, those bigger gators are much easier to spot, whereas Ronnie is a little bit more of our specialized viewing.
Now, I just thought of something interesting that probably most people don't know about alligators. That the sex of the young is not determined by the adults, but determined by the temperature the eggs are incubated at. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so it's actually really fascinating. This does happen with other reptile species as well, but for alligators, it's like this really very short temperature range. So typically, we think of it, things are determined for us by sex chromosomes, so that way we know right away. In this case, it's all about the eggs and the temperature that they are laid at. So for a male, they actually want to be closer to that kind of 90-degree temperature range, versus the females are actually going to be lower than that. So there's a fairly narrow band where when that female alligator lays her eggs, depending on the temperature that those eggs stay at, it could either have males, females, or both. And so there's it's very important. So sometimes if there's a lot of males around, maybe they need to keep them deeper in the surface. They need to dig the hole deeper so that way they can get more females, or they need to keep them higher up, but that keeps it warmer. All of those different things are very important for those species. It kind of levels out the amount of males and females, but very, very kind of interesting that way. Very different from mammals. Those reptiles are able to determine through that temperature.
Do mom and dad help take care of the babies?
Dad does not, but mom is kind of around, and she can provide a certain level of protection for the babies. When those babies form that kind of pod, she can be around, and really that can protect them from other predators, whether that's snakes or something. I mean, a lot of things could get a tiny baby gator, but with mom around, suddenly it's a lot harder to get those smaller gators, and it's a lot less worth it maybe for those predators. So usually with her nearby and those smaller gators hanging out near mom, that's a pretty good protection, and they can stay with mom for anywhere from a year to maybe 2 or 3 even.
Cool. Well, someone had asked, since Ronnie's a baby, can he bite?
Can he bite? Absolutely. He can definitely still bite. He has those teeth, and that's how he's going to actually get his food. He is still a predator, and so even though he has chosen to ignore his insects today, he actually he'll open up his jaws, and again, that takes a little bit more effort, and then he'll quickly snap his jaws, and if it's small enough, he'll swallow it, and if it's too big, he might shake it, kind of get it in the water, get it into smaller pieces, but he doesn't chew. He does not chew his food. So he's able to instead, he still bites, but he kind of has to use those teeth to help him break up his food in a non-chewing way. So that way he kind of, might shake it in the water, it might dissolve a little bit, it might rip up, and so all of that's very important when they eat their food.
Very cool. Well, I think we've answered most of the questions that people were asking about Ronnie. And so now that we're getting close to the end of our segment, is there anything else you'd like to add about Ronnie? Or
we're very excited that Ronnie's here. We're looking forward to all of his training and how he progresses, and we hope you guys look forward to learning more about Ronnie and our alligators as well. And so we're very glad that you guys could join us, and we'd like to thank Jiffy Lube of Greater Sacramento for sponsoring this and allowing you guys to see Ronnie up close. And we hope you guys enjoyed this segment.
Thanks for joining us.